My name is Iris Ashford, and I am 34 years old. Last Christmas Eve, my mother slid a glossy, ribbon-tied box across her dining room table, tapped the silk bow twice, and told me it was my future. Inside was a framed employment contract to become my younger sister's executive assistant for $52,000 a year. My parents had spent weeks orchestrating that exact moment. My sister sat across from me, sipping champagne and smiling through every single second of it. Not a single person at that lavish table knew that I owned a logistics and venture enterprise valued at $1.5 billion. They genuinely believed I was a struggling, broke boutique clerk who needed to be rescued from her own failures. And I let them believe it, because I wanted to see with brutal clarity how my own family treats a person they think has absolutely nothing left to offer them. By the end of that night, my sister was curled up on the cold kitchen floor in tears, and it had nothing to do with my wealth. But here is the secret none of them realized when I walked through their front door. The box with my name on it was the smallest trap waiting in that house. Let me show you a normal Tuesday, 3 days before that fateful dinner. At 10 in the morning, I was kneeling on the carpet of Ashford Vintage Books, reorganizing rare paperbacks, while listening to a sweet regular customer explain her grandson's newest fascination. My shop sits on Main Street in Crestview, Maine, inside a drafty brick building with an ancient radiator that clanks every 10 minutes. I have operated it for 9 years. The entire town knows me as the soft-spoken, plain Ashford girl who lives upstairs and drives a beat-up 12-year-old sedan. I drive that car because it runs fine and I genuinely like it. But try explaining that level of simplicity to a family that measures human worth entirely by price tags. Here is the part of my life no one in Crestview could ever see. At 4 o'clock that same afternoon, I walked up the private back stairs to my loft, opened my encrypted laptop, and quietly authorized the $40 million acquisition of a Midwest shipping fleet, a single electronic signature on a screen. Then I walked back downstairs and helped a little boy find a book about ocean life. That is my dual reality. I founded Apex Global Logistics over a decade ago. We handle supply chains, automated warehousing, and freight operations for major retail giants across North America. Our latest valuation placed us at $1.5 billion, and I retain a strict 60% controlling stake. Beyond a tight circle of corporate attorneys, exactly 2 people knew my name was on the master deeds. My brilliant chief operating officer, Marcus, who handles the public press, and my grandmother, Eleanor, who knew I was comfortable and never asked for a figure. My parents, however, were convinced I was always one bad month away from begging them for rent. I never corrected them. Before we dive deeper into this story, hit that subscribe button right now to see how this incredible revenge unfolds. Type which country or state you are watching from in the comments below. I would love to say hello to you personally and see how far across the world our story is reaching. You will understand why I kept my silence in a minute, because that same Tuesday afternoon, while I was still smelling of old paper glue, my mother called my mobile. My mother's voice has 2 distinct settings, honey and scalpel. She can pivot between them in the exact same breath. "Iris, darling," she began smoothly. "Christmas Eve, 6 o'clock sharp at our house. We are throwing a celebration for your sister." I asked what special occasion we were celebrating. The dramatic pause she took was pure theater. "Chloe has been named Chief Executive Officer of Vantage Home Products. $600,000 a year, Iris. Imagine that, a real CEO in our family." She let that astronomical salary breathe in the air, the way some people let fine wine settle. Then the scalpel came out so seamlessly, I almost respected the skill behind it. "And there is something very important your father and I want to discuss with you too. About your future. You are 34 years old, Iris. That little bookstore was a sweet little hobby for a while, but sweet hobbies do not fund a comfortable retirement, do they? Please wear something presentable. Harrison Vance might drop by. He is the chairman of Chloe's new board, a very powerful man. Try not to talk about paperbacks all night." Then her tone softened into the exact sentence I have heard my entire adult life, the statement she genuinely mistakes for parental affection. "We just want you to be somebody, Iris." She disconnected before I could utter a word, which was fine, because in 11 years, I had never found an answer she was capable of hearing. I stood in my quiet apartment holding my phone, a woman who had authorized a $40 million corporate acquisition 3 hours prior, being instructed to dress nicely so I wouldn't embarrass my relatives in front of a wealthy stranger. Have you ever had a family member talk down to you as if your hard work meant nothing, simply because it didn't look flashy to them? Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to sit through a family dinner like that. Here is the thing you must understand about me. I was not angry. Anger requires hope, and mine had been replaced long ago by a deep, permanent scar. To understand that scar, I have to take you back 11 years. I was 23, and I had just watched my very first business venture collapse. It was a modest regional delivery service, 2 leased vans, custom scheduling software I wrote myself on a kitchen table, and 14 months of brutal 20-hour workdays. A massive national competitor moved into my region, slashed prices below cost, and wiped me out. I lost my vans, my savings, and my confidence. I went home for Thanksgiving that year feeling hollowed out, looking for a warm meal and perhaps one comforting voice to say, "You tried something brave." Instead, I was summoned to a formal family trial. My mother had arranged the living room like a courtroom, me sitting on a low footstool, while everyone else sat elevated above me on expensive sofas. She had actually taken written notes detailing my personal failure, my bank loan, my broken lease, the partner who left me, even the weight I had gained from stress. My father stared quietly at his shoes, while my sister Chloe, already a rising corporate manager, watched in silence. My mother built up to her big finish, holding her written list like a prosecutor. She leaned forward, took both of my trembling hands like she was offering mercy, and said, "Dreams are for people who can afford them, Iris." My uncle actually muttered an amen from the corner. I spent the remainder of that Thanksgiving night washing dirty gravy boats in the kitchen so no one would see the tears burning my eyes. Somewhere between the roasting pan and the dessert plates, a part of my soul went dead silent and permanently cold. They would never witness me try again. They would never witness my success. Period. If my ambitions were a luxury item, I would build them in a place where my family could never window shop. That secret began as a bandage, but over 11 years, it hardened into impenetrable armor. I worked graveyard shifts managing commercial freight distribution. I wrote logistics algorithms in break rooms. I launched Apex Global Logistics with one client and a single laptop. Growth was slow, then explosive. We bought out failing competitors, acquired regional supply chains, and dominated e-commerce infrastructure. When national business journals began writing articles about the mysterious enterprise, my COO, Marcus, became the public face. Reporters nicknamed the hidden majority owner the Ghost. I loved being the Ghost. The Ghost never sat on a low footstool in a living room. My rule was absolute. Information is inventory. I never revealed my assets to anyone. I bought the old brick building on Main Street and opened the bookstore because a small shop is the one business my family would never envy or covet. 3 days before Christmas Eve, my phone buzzed with a group text message from my mother titled, "Christmas Dinner Plan." She had clearly created it in a hurry because she forgot to exclude one person, me. The messages rolled in. First came the catering menu, then the seating chart, which placed me directly between my mother and Chloe's arrogant husband. Then came a message from my mother, complete with her signature heart emojis. Frank reads his speech after dessert. Chloe presents the job offer. Do not mention the assistant position until after the champagne toast. Let Iris enjoy her dinner first. And 30 seconds later, the sentence that burned into my brain. Nobody tell Iris it's an intervention. She'll run. My sister saw the message. Her husband saw it. My father was in the room while it was typed. Not one of them replied, "Wait, she is in this chat." Not one of them said, "Maybe we shouldn't ambush her at Christmas." The thread simply went dead silent. That was when I realized the entire evening was a scripted, rehearsed play, and I was cast as the tragic loser. Have you ever caught your own family talking behind your back or plotting against you? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. I put my phone down and made a decision. They believed I was broke, naive, and desperate. Fine. I would walk into that house wearing the exact pathetic character they had invented. I would watch every condescending smile, collect every insult as data, and decide once and for all if these people deserved any place in my future. On the morning of December 23rd, my COO, Marcus, sent an urgent operational file to my encrypted laptop. The timing was almost poetic. It was an executive review of Vantage Home Products, the regional retailer where my sister, Chloe, had just been named CEO. They were one of Apex's major retail clients, and they were bleeding profusely. Their corporate invoices were 90 days past due, and they had missed 2 consecutive volume commitments. My financial analysts were recommending immediate contract termination by January. For a retail chain coming right out of the holiday season, losing their primary logistics network wasn't just a setback, it was a fatal heart attack. I read the report summary twice. Chloe's $600,000 triumph, the absolute crown jewel of tomorrow's family dinner, was the top job at an enterprise rapidly sinking into bankruptcy. She had no idea that her primary vendor was operated by her quiet sister in a bookstore. I typed a single command back to Marcus. Hold all termination actions until after the holidays. No further explanation. I told myself it was professional diligence, not mercy. The next evening, I parked my 12-year-old sedan behind a line of luxury vehicles in my parents' driveway and walked up to the front door to be humiliated on schedule. My parents' house looked like a high-end Christmas catalog had exploded. Lush garland wrapped every staircase, a 10-foot tree glittered in the living room, and a hired server in a black apron was taking coats. My mother met me at the door, offered a shallow kiss toward my cheek, and performed a full visual scan: my thrifted coat, my worn boots, my unpolished nails. "Oh, Iris," she sighed with deep disappointment. "You could have made an effort. Come inside before the neighbors notice." The grand dining table was set for 14. At each seat lay a calligraphy place card displaying titles: Chloe Ashford, Chief Executive Officer; Frank Ashford, Head of the Family. My card simply read, Iris. Just my plain name, floating on white cardstock like an afterthought. Standing by the marble fireplace was a silver-haired man wearing an expensive tailored suit, Harrison Vance, the powerful chairman of Chloe's board. My mother glowed as she introduced him. But as Vance looked at me, his eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to place a face he had seen in a very different setting. 2 years ago, across a closed-door boardroom table in Chicago, he had seen the ghost for 10 minutes. During cocktail hour, my family treated me like an invisible ghost of a different kind. They made condescending jokes about my little paperbacks, patted my arm with pity, and offered unsolicited advice on finding real work. Not a single person asked if I was happy. Then my mother clinked her crystal glass, signaling for silence. The room quieted down. The scripted ambush was officially beginning. My mother stood at the head of the dining table with a folded sheet of paper in her hand. She delivered what she called a brief review of our family's proudest year. It was essentially a lavish corporate announcement, where my sister Chloe was the sole star. She walked everyone through Chloe's promotion, detailing the fierce negotiations, the corner office, and the prestige. When she reached the salary figure, she slowed down her delivery, giving every single digit its own dramatic spotlight: $600,000 a year. The entire room erupted into applause. Chloe's husband whistled loudly, while my uncle clapped my father on the back. Chloe stood amidst the praise, polished and glowing. I clapped too, because despite everything, my sister had always worked relentlessly. Then my mother turned her eyes directly toward me, and the room's warm energy instantly dropped. "And Iris," she said, glancing down at her written sheet as if my existence required a footnote, "is still running her quiet little bookstore. A tiny shop on Main Street. We keep hoping." A quiet, cruel ripple of laughter moved through the room, the kind of polite amusement people offer when they are relieved the mocking spotlight isn't on them. I simply smiled and raised my glass. One broke girl saluting the elite. However, I noticed something crucial. Harrison Vance, the board chairman, wasn't laughing at all. He was staring back and forth between Chloe and me with an expression of intense confusion. The words tiny bookstore seemed to contradict something in his memory. Before dinner was served, Vance cornered me near the brass beverage cart. "So, Iris," he murmured, swirling his scotch. "The bookstore owner. Fascinating times in logistics these days. Your sister's enterprise uses a logistics provider called Apex Global, runs our entire distribution backbone. Nobody knows who actually owns it. The industry calls the owner a ghost." I widened my eyes innocently. A ghost? Can a real company be owned by a ghost? Vance didn't smile. I was in a private boardroom in Chicago 2 years ago. Dozens of corporate attorneys. The ghost walked in for 10 minutes, sat in the third chair from the window, and never spoke a word. The entire room waited for her nod before signing $60 million. Funny thing, you look remarkably like her. I let out a soft, playful giggle. Me? I sell picture books to schoolchildren, Mr. Vance. But that sounds like an incredible story. He stared at me for 3/10 seconds, trying to calculate the odds. Before he could probe further, my mother swept in to pull him away. Have you ever had to play dumb or hide your true power just to survive a toxic environment? Share your experience in the comments below. Then came the moment of truth. They sent me to the kitchen to fetch serving bowls. Under the grand Christmas tree, sitting separate from the other gifts, was a sleek box wrapped in gold foil with a wide red ribbon. The tag in my mother's handwriting read, "To Iris, your future, love, Mom, and Dad." Through the open kitchen archway, I overheard my mother and Chloe speaking in hushed, practiced tones. "After the dessert course, your father reads his letter," my mother instructed softly. "Then, Chloe, you hand her the employment contract. Be a supportive big sister, not a boss." Then she opens the box. "Do not let her give an answer until all our guests are watching. She won't dare make a scene in front of important people. She never does." And my sister, the celebrated $600,000 executive, replied without hesitation, "I know. That's exactly what I'm counting on." I carried the dishes back to the grand dining room and set them down with absolute precision. Inside my chest, the very last warm emotion I held for my family quietly withered away. Humiliating me wasn't a sudden impulse. They had actively produced and rehearsed it like a theatrical play. When the meal concluded, my father stood up, holding a folded sheet of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he began reading aloud. "Iris," he read, his voice tight. "You are 34 years old. We love you, and it breaks our hearts to watch you waste your life in a failing shop." The written letter continued line by line, my mother's cruel thoughts read through my father's hesitant mouth. Every sentence was polished to wound. My bookstore was labeled a hiding place for my fear of failure. My old sedan was brought up, along with my single status, drawing sympathetic nods from my aunts. I sat with my hands resting in my lap, absorbing every word as cold data. Then my mother took center stage, her head held high like a hero performing an act of charity. "We just want you to be somebody, Iris," she declared dramatically. She nodded, and Chloe walked over to the tree, retrieved the gold-wrapped box, and placed it directly in front of me. Inside lay a formal employment contract printed on company letterhead. Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer. Salary, $52,000. Reporting directly to Chloe Ashford. My sister leaned down close to my ear, warm and patronizing, and whispered her rehearsed line. "You don't have to be great, Iris. You just have to be near greatness." I stared at the contract offered to me like a life raft while my actual enterprise moved millions every hour. But before I could react, Vance's smartphone vibrated violently in his suit pocket. He read the screen, and the formidable board chairman turned as pale as a bedsheet. "Excuse me for a moment," I said calmly, stepping out onto the frost-covered back porch to place a quick phone call to Marcus. He answered immediately. "Iris, I was about to text you. Vantage Home Products Board is holding an emergency meeting tonight. Their operational debt is leaking, and they are trying to force Chloe to execute a personal equity buy-in of $340,000 of her own savings tomorrow morning to cover their losses before news of our contract cancellation hits." I looked through the window at my sister, who was laughing and celebrating her fake success. Her board was setting her up to sink her entire life savings into a dying ship, completely unaware that her quiet sister held the master key to her entire industry. Before I could walk back inside, Harrison Vance intercepted me in the quiet hallway leading to my father's study. The suave chairman persona was completely gone, replaced by calculated desperation. "A word, Iris," he said sharply, steering me inside and closing the door. "Chicago, 2 years ago, September 30th, private conference room at Wexler and Roth. There were 4 lawyers, 2 investment bankers, and a woman sitting quietly in the 3rd chair by the window who never said a word. When the acquisition terms shifted at the 11th hour, every high-priced attorney in that room stopped talking and waited for her nod. $60 million moved on her signal." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I was representing the seller that day, Miss Ashford. I've spent 2 years trying to figure out who that mysterious majority owner was, and tonight, I walk into a family dinner in Maine, and she's sitting across from me being handed an assistant contract. Tell me I'm wrong." I stood in my father's dim study, the place where I had been conditioned to feel small, and took a quiet breath. I was so tired of hiding inside the ghost persona. "3rd chair from the window," I said softly. Vance aged 5 years in 2 seconds. "My God," he whispered. "You're the ghost of Apex Global." Then, true to his corporate nature, he immediately tried to negotiate. "Extend Apex's supply contract for Vantage Home products through Q2. Give us room to breathe, and I won't say a word to your family about tonight's revelation. Chloe gets to keep her CEO title, and everybody wins." "Enjoy your dinner, Gerald," I said coolly, walking out of the study and leaving him standing in the dark. I stepped back into the dining room just as my mother tapped her champagne glass. "Iris, darling, the pen is waiting. Sign your contract in front of everyone." I looked around the table at my family, their faces filled with condescending expectation. Before I could speak, Chloe grabbed my wrist and pulled me into the kitchen. But instead of the arrogant executive, my sister looked completely shattered. "Iris, please just sign it," she whispered frantically, her makeup smudging. "I know Mom is being insufferable, but if you take the job, she'll finally back off. You have no idea what pressure I'm under. The company's internal reports are a mess. Finance is hiding numbers from me, and the board is forcing me to wire $340,000 of my personal savings tomorrow to show market confidence. Just take the position so Mom relaxes, and one of us gets to breathe." Looking at my sister, I realized the ultimate tragedy of my family. They hadn't built a ladder for her and a cage for me. They had built 2 cages and gold-plated hers. I gently removed Chloe's hand from my wrist. "Follow me," I said quietly. I pushed open the swinging kitchen door and walked back into the dining room, heading straight for the head of the table. I did not pick up the pen on the piano. "Chloe," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient chatter. "One question before anyone signs anything tonight. Has anyone shown you Vantage's real aging report?" Across the room, Harrison Vance set his glass down so abruptly, the glass cracked against the mahogany sideboard. "Iris," my mother snapped, standing up, "sit down this instant and stop embarrassing yourself." I remained standing, keeping my tone perfectly calm and deliberate. "Receivables running 90 days past due. 2 straight quarters of missed volume commitments to your primary logistics vendor. Warehouse inventory stacked 2 seasons deep because retail sell-through collapsed in September, and a corporate credit line that is entirely maxed out. Which is precisely why, 3 weeks after hiring you, your board is pressuring their brand new CEO to write a personal check for $340,000 to cover their cash flow deficit." The words hit the room like dropped iron. Chloe's husband scoffed loudly, while my aunt muttered something about bitter jealousy. My mother stood up, her face flushed with fury. "Iris Ashford, your sister runs a major corporation. You sell paperbacks in a drafty shop. Apologize to this room right now." I didn't move an inch, because I was watching Harrison Vance. The chairman had gone the exact color of wet cardboard. He tried twice to laugh it off as emotional holiday nonsense, but the laugh died in his throat because everyone in the room saw the sheer terror on his face before he could mask it. Chloe looked from Vance to me, 3 weeks of confusion suddenly crystallizing. "The aging report," she whispered, turning to Vance. "I asked finance for the detailed receivables twice, Gerald. I was given summaries." Why does my sister know my company's exact internal numbers? The question hung in the air like heavy frost. Every eyes at that table turned toward me. Because Apex Global Logistics is mine, I said quietly. I founded it 11 years ago. I own 60% of it. My enterprise operates every warehouse and every shipping line Vantage relies on. My financial team has spent 3 weeks deciding whether to terminate your corporate account. That is why I know your numbers, Chloe. They cross my desk before they ever reach yours. Silence descended on the room, a silence so dense you could hear the ice melt in 14 abandoned glasses. Then my mother laughed. She genuinely laughed, a shrill, desperate sound, and looked around the table for support. Iris, sweetheart, Apex is a billion-dollar company. Gerald, tell her how absurd she's being. She turned to Vance, holding out her hands for confirmation. But Harrison Vance simply looked at me, remembered Chicago, and sat down heavily in his chair, placing his drink on the floor. Chicago, he whispered, staring at his hands. She's telling the truth, Sandra. My mother's face went from arrogance to shock, and then, in a sickening flash, into immediate calculation. I watched her begin to reevaluate me in real time, calculating what my true net worth meant for her social standing. And in that moment, I realized the full cost of revealing my secret. I would never know if any love she showed me from that day forward was for me, or for the $1.5 billion. My father stood up, looked directly at my mother, and spoke in a tone I had never heard from him in my entire life. Sandra, sit down, quietly. It was absolute and unprecedented. My mother sat. I turned back to Vance. Here is what happens now, Gerald. Apex will extend Vantage's payment terms for 90 days and hold off on contract termination through Q1 under 2 strict conditions. First, the mandatory personal equity buy-in for Chloe disappears tonight. She will not wire a single dollar of her savings. Second, an independent forensic audit firm of my choosing will gain full access to your books by January 15th. Chloe will run a real, transparent company with real numbers. Or you can explain to your board on December 26th why your primary supply chain vanished overnight. Vance looked around the room, realization sinking in that a holiday dinner had turned into a hostile corporate takeover. He quietly swallowed his pride and said, "Agreed." My sister sank onto a dining chair, overwhelmed with emotion not because of my wealth, but because for the first time in her life, someone had stepped in to protect her from being exploited. I retrieved my coat, gave my grandmother Eleanor a gentle squeeze on her shoulder, and walked out into the falling snow. My mother followed me onto the driveway, her voice quiet and stripped of all its usual theater. I thought if you girls had titles and wealth, the world couldn't diminish you the way it diminished me, she admitted softly. I thought that was what love was. That is the first honest thing you have said to me in 11 years, I replied quietly. Say it again sometime, when you haven't just been caught. Over the next year, the forensic audit exposed years of hidden corporate debt. Vance quietly resigned. Vantage restructured into a lean, honest enterprise. And Chloe retained her role on fair, real terms, without losing her life savings. I bought my grandmother's house at fair market value, and she still lives there, paying me rent in fresh, home-baked pies every month. This Christmas, there were no place cards, no titles, and no rehearsed speeches. Just 6 people learning how to speak quietly to one another. If you are reading this or listening today, and the people at your table only measure your worth by your job title or your bank account, let this be your sign to stop shrinking yourself to fit their narrative. Thank you so much for following Iris's story through every single chapter on Revenge Petal. What did you think of how she handled her family and saved her sister? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable stories of silent strength and dynamic justice.